The first topic that you all asked me to talk about is the subject of emotions, which is a very important topic for everyone. Of course, especially for women, because we are more inclined that way. It's the best thing about us and one of the most difficult things. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today is nothing that I have invented or made up. It's a very orthodox teaching, really, that I represent. Paramhansa Yogananda, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, is the origin point. My own training in this path, though, has been entirely through Swami Kriyananda. I really had no connection to Yogananda until I met Kriyananda. He is, as you know, he's an American, Yogananda being an Indian, but he spent his life in America. I was born and raised in America. I never even had a passport until I was in my 30s, although now I've been quite extensively traveled, I think, and have been to India a number of times. But I came to this spiritual path in my late teens. I had always been looking for truth. I had a comfortable life in America. I could have been successful in many different ways. I had those kinds of abilities and the ability to be good at school, which is what all you're asked to do when you're young. But I was very quietly but deeply concerned about where my life could go that would actually bring me something that I really wanted. I had a very strong desire to be happy, is how I always felt about it, even though I wasn't the slightest bit unhappy. But there was, when I think of it now, I think it's past life memories of having disappointing experiences and having those experiences drive me to want to have a deeper understanding of what life is about. And I was very frustrated because nobody around me seemed to be addressing those issues at all. So I was sort of just quietly waiting to grow up, waiting to see what would happen. And after 1 year of college, at the end of that year, which it was very unsatisfactory to me, I went to Stanford University, which is, of course, a major university. I expected to meet wisdom there. I did not find wisdom. I found intelligence, but not wisdom. And I immediately became aware of the difference. And I was quite uncertain about my future. And then someone handed me a book by Vivekananda, who I'd never heard of. It was completely from nowhere, living in America, in California, in 1966. But as soon as that book was in my hand, I recognized it. I just recognized that this was what I knew was somewhere, which was an understanding of life that was more than superficial. I dove into that very strongly for a few years, but I was still trapped in the fact that I couldn't understand how you could take these ideas and actually make them into a way of life. I was still just living the American lifestyle and reading about self-realization and yogis in caves and Paramhansa Ramakrishna and all of those things, but my life wasn't changing. And it was right in that state of mind and in that feeling that Swami Kriyananda walked into my life. And I know he was sent by God out of my desperate prayer. And he was such an interesting combination of the orthodoxy of Indian teachings because of his relationship to Yogananda, and he was completely American at the same time. He was totally from the context I was living. I didn't have to make any strange bridges. He spoke English with the American accent. It was easy. But mostly what I saw in him, as soon as I saw him, was this very practical approach. I could see that he'd taken these ideas, which were so big, and he'd made them an everyday part of life, which is exactly what I was trying to do myself and couldn't even begin to figure out how you did it. More than that, he was in the very beginning stages of building what has become Ananda Sangha, which at that point was one community in one place in California. No other country, not even any other city. And it was an isolated piece of rural land, mostly undeveloped. If any of you have seen the Ananda Pune community, it looked a lot like that. Just almost no buildings, and no electricity, no indoor plumbing, no running water, just as primitive as it could be. But he had this vision, which all these 40 years later, we can see what it was. At that time, though, I myself was 22. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain as far as I could see. The American economy was booming at that time, so there wasn't the slightest anxiety about stepping off of a career track or being able to step back into it. It was a completely different reality. Didn't make any difference. There was no anxiety about the future. And I just went up to that rural land. And I lived there for 16 years. And everything that I thought that Swami Kriyananda might be able to teach me, insofar as I've been able to learn it, he has. And I would define that as really simply, which is if self-realization is the goal of life, if Satchidananda is the underlying reality, if the purpose of life is to come more into that state of bliss, then this is how you do it. And the fact that from the beginning, Ananda was a community, which meant that we had families, we had children, we had married couples, we also had monks and nuns, but it was by no means traditional either. It was neither traditional for East or West. It was a complete and radical experiment. And for the first 10 years or so that we were there, we lived very isolated. We ran a retreat where the public was invited, but we didn't really even advertise very much. And Swami Kriyananda was writing and we were reaching out, but we really defined a world unto ourselves. We took Indian names, we wore Indian clothes, we sort of, I found out later, just kind of played this like kind of Disneyland version of what India might be. It wasn't till I came here that I kind of got a balance. And I think Swamiji had a much more refined understanding, but he just let us play. And we had a good time. But what we did, because it was so different and we were so self-contained, we really got to experiment and we really got to develop from the inside out. It's like, if these are my values and if this is what I think is important, then what does it look like? How do I relate to my friends? How do I meditate? How do I work? How do I deal with my fears? How do I work with money? You know, how do I fall in love? How do I raise children? But picking it up from that string. Of course, the Indian culture has always had that string more, but nonetheless, the traffic, the demands on your time, the demands of your families, the pressure on your children to excel in school, 1,000 things kind of cloud and makes it harder to see. Swamiji had this idea, which at the time, even though sometimes he would hint at what he was seeing, he actually said to us, he found it did not inspire us, it frightened us for him to talk about where we were going and what we were going to do. He said, at first I talked about it a lot, but then I realized that it made people nervous, so he didn't much say what he knew. In 1971, he talked about, 1971, that's a long time ago, he talked about we would make a center in Europe, we would make a center in India. I always remembered it because it was like saying, we're going to go to the moon, and then we're going to go to Saturn, and then we're going to go to Mars. You know, we were living in primitive huts with no money, and how was that ever going to happen? But what he was really doing was training us in a new understanding, not only of ourselves, but in a very real sense, and I mean this in the right way, a whole new approach to spirituality. And that comes not from me, I would never presume to say such a thing, but from Yogananda's definition of his mission, which he writes in Autobiography of a Yogi, which you all are at least familiar with. And he talks about Jesus and Babaji and the idea of what the planet as a whole needs at this time. And there's paragraphs in there that are, Jesus and Babaji are concerned about the materialistic development of the world, and they're concerned about the potential for violence and the globally and all those things. And they have together come up with a plan. I mean, I believe what he has written because I believe in him. I have no way of understanding what that really means. So I have to bring it down to a very small, something I can bite and really understand. And to me, it looks like this. It looks like, going from what Yogananda said, he talked about the eternal role of the culture of India, as he called it many times, the guru of the planet, the place in which the true principles of Sanatana Dharma have been preserved, that Hinduism and the culture here understands that moksha is the goal of life, and there's no other spiritual tradition that has that so clear and central. At the same time, because of the karma of the country, until recently, India was less capable on the material plane. Now, of course, in the 30 years since I've been traveling here, the country's just rising like a tide, which is Swamiji commented, Swami Kriyananda commented sometimes when he was here. I mean, I love the way he would put it. He said, India is far too important to the destiny of the planet to not take its proper place, which means it has to come up economically, it has to live on par with every other country. It can't be considered a developing nation, which is an insult, in a sense, to the true power here, but has been a fact. Now, the other side of that is the American side of it, because what Yogananda spoke of, and I myself am just trying to understand what this is about, is the practicality of the West combined with the power, the spiritual power of the East, and how the two of these come together. And I've been intrigued because growing up American, being trained in this in an American way, Americans only think practically. It just doesn't, I didn't even know we were practical. I just thought we were what we were. I thought this is how people are. Part of it's, history, the karma of a country is a real thing, and souls who choose to come there for a reason. Karma of America has been, we're barely out of infancy compared to the Indian culture. I mean, if that, we might not even be out of the womb. Just a couple of 100 years. And we have nothing behind us. The Indian culture has this enormous, powerful tradition of greatness. So there's a certain capacity just to tune into that greatness. Those of us who come from the outside, there's an atmosphere here. I live in Silicon Valley, which is, there's as many Indians sitting in Starbucks across from our temple as there are in the ones in the malls here. I mean, I didn't know where I was. It's all the same. But even the most materialistic Indian has a spiritual quality that is just the way that you are. But on the American side, we've had to, as a culture, we've had to make our own way. And the Europeans landed and it was wilderness. I mean, just thousands of miles of wilderness. We disregarded the indigenous people and just never considered them seriously. So it was really just a blank slate as far as they were concerned. And everything that's been built has been built in very recent memory. And the whole attitude of the American is looking forward, because there's nothing to look back to. So everything that comes into our hands is a question of, what can I do with this? I mean, it becomes comical in terms of the products that people make to sell and that sort of thing, but it's always, what can I do with this? So when Yogananda, I call him Master, when Master came to America, he brought a full understanding of a very ancient and orthodox tradition. He came to teach what he called the original teachings of Krishna. He traces it back and teaches from the Bhagavad Gita, of course. But he brought it to America to say, what can I do with this? And how can I really use this, not merely admire it, not merely speculate, not merely argue with people, not merely look really smart, because I know this, but what can I actually do with it? And that was my only interest. My spiritual life has come right from the inside of myself. You know, it was my heart's longing for something I couldn't even name, but that I recognized in Swamiji, and I have devoted all my life since 1969 to learning, practicing, and very quickly just passing it along. So all of that is to say, I'll go where we're actually going. Oh, let me just, the last point. And because of my particular orientation, because of Swami Kriyananda's orientation, and because it was all in the context of a whole life that wasn't separated from all of life, that every aspect of the spiritual path had to be applied for us to be able to get along with each other and to build what we've built. I jokingly say that spiritual community is worse than marriage in this sense. Marriage ends when you die, but spiritual family goes on and on and on. You may meet your husband and wife again if you want to, but or even if you don't want to. But a distant relative of mine, her husband died after 60 years. And someone said to her, "Oh, don't worry, you'll see him again," meaning in that context in heaven. And she just said very honestly, "I think 60 years was quite long enough." But with spiritual family, your guru buys, you're on this path, this incarnation, next incarnation, you're going to have to work it out. So it becomes a really, you just have to figure it out. I mean, that's what you have to do with marriage also. If you're taking divorce as not an option, extended families, you all understand that. Our spiritual teaching can go right into the heart of that and make all of that easier. And so now, if there's any questions or comments about what I've said, I'm going to start talking about emotion. Any thoughts? All right. We have a problem. I mean, English is the only language I speak. I'm sure all of you are multilingual. I don't know Sanskrit, and Swami Kriyananda has never thought it was important for us to learn, so I've never learned. So all of the teaching I do, I have to do in English. English-speaking people have not necessarily been primarily interested in subtle states of consciousness. They're much more interested in practical things. I'm sure there's a lot more words for the parts of an engine than there are for the parts of the mind in English. So when we start talking about the subject of emotions particularly, we have to come to an agreement about what we're talking about because the words don't have precise meaning. And one of the factors about emotions that are an extremely important thing to understand, and because the room is only women, except for the one running the camera, and he's a guest. I'm addressing that subject to all of you. We all know that there is, well, let me back up just a moment. The reality of the feminine and the masculine is most clearly identifiable when we look at men and women, who, as Swamiji is quick to point out, are a lot more like each other than not like each other, but nonetheless there's a lot of differences. And the fact of men and women is not really what creates those differences. It's the fact that creation itself is dual, and that there is a receptive and an active, what you might call positive and a negative, but not in a not negative connotation like that. I like the yin and the yang, I think, are the easiest way to say it, because it's so neutral. You can say yin and yang and nobody has a reaction to that. But those two energies, which you can also call reason and feeling, are essential to make the whole, to make the circle complete. Each half of that equation has something to offer, and each is weaker without the other. So when we start talking about the feminine aspect of consciousness, generally speaking, people who incarnate in female bodies are feminine in their nature, but not always by any means. And at the end of the the story of the soul. We move in and out of male and female bodies. The soul does not have a gender. We may find ourselves settling into one or the other. We may have an orientation. I always think of myself as a woman. I don't know why. Whenever I even imagine future incarnations, I realize in my mind I'm always in a feminine body, even though I'm probably more of a man than most women I know, but there you have it. It's just that we get comfortable in one place or another. But because the feminine body itself, with the hormones and everything about it, leans toward the feeling side of things, women have to really have a responsibility to figure out how to bring that into balance. Because if a woman can balance that energy, she has an enormous amount to offer. And if that energy is imbalanced, she's a trial to herself and everyone who knows her. I listened to my husband once counseling this young man who was struggling with a woman that he was in love with. And I accidentally ended up eavesdropping because I sort of got trapped and I couldn't get out of the room that I was in. And I listened to this man tell this story of, how difficult this woman was, at the end of which my wonderful husband said, "Well, that's women." And the fact of the matter was, that was really about all there was to say. Swami Kriyananda put it once about the sun and the moon, which of course the moon represents the female, the sun the male. The masculine energy, the sun rises and sets and it shifts, but it shifts very slowly. Over a very long period of time, it shifts a minute or a half a minute, just very lightly, and over the course of 12 months, the sun will do its whole cycle. The woman is the moon, and the moon is always waxing and waning and waxing and waning and waxing and waning, and just when it gets to be full, it starts to shrink again, and then just when it hits the bottom, it starts. So it's just this sort of constant. Of course, that makes the feminine energy far more sensitive to things that the masculine energy just doesn't even see, which is why I think it's interesting that the project that you all are doing together is all being done by women, and it's a very feeling-oriented project. Okay, now the difficulty is, and I'll go up to the board here and I'll make some pictures and make some definitions. I was starting to say, let me extricate my cord here so that I won't suddenly be choked and fall on my head. Can you get it off the wheel? Thank you. Okay. Well, since I'm all dressed in blue, I will, of course, write with blue. Why would I write with any other color? Starting with the idea of language, there's two words that are relevant here. And this is where I was saying that these are arbitrary definitions. There's the concept of feeling, and then there's the concept of emotion. And for the sake of the conversation we're going to have today, we have to really understand that these are two different things. Feeling is the fundamental quality of the universe. When we talk about Satchidananda, which Master defined as ever-existing, ever-new, ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new joy. And the substance of the universe is not devoid of feeling. The substance of the universe is feeling. Feeling, primarily that feeling of bliss, that feeling of joy. That's what it is that motivates all of us. I've often thought to myself how interesting it is that all the scriptures write about the fact that bliss is inherent in our nature, and that we actually simply, we block the flow. We can never eliminate the flow, we just make ourselves unconscious of the flow. I think it was just on Sunday when I saw your section, Blissology. I was delighted. It's just that people are so creative. Just a perfect coined word to say exactly what we want to say. And it's the science of happiness. Ananda itself actually is about to release a movie in India, which is called Finding Happiness. Some of you may have been at the screening. Sonal has seen it. Okay. And happiness is really what a word that really communicates to people. Like feeling and emotion, there's a difference between bliss and happiness, joy. All the words get a little scrambled because we don't have the benefit of Sanskrit, but we know what we're talking about. But it's interesting to me, you see, one of the evidences of the fact that bliss is our true nature is the fact that we are unhappy when we're unhappy. Meaning, if there was no possibility of bliss, there would be nothing in us that rebels against the lack of it. If it was just the way things are, that we should be outside of that, it wouldn't even cross our minds that there's another reality. And the way the scriptures explain it, of Satchidananda, of bliss being our true nature, it's that when all other limiting conditions are removed, what's left is a feeling. We recognize the feeling, and it's not an idea. The word ananda itself, as you know, it means that kind of bliss. It's changing. We use that word to break through the joy, bliss, happiness conundrum of the English language, to really speak of that quality which is always with us. And the reason we're drawn to it is because it is a feeling. If it were just an idea, it wouldn't have that power over us. This is where masculine and feminine work together also. The masculine can be fascinated by ideas, but unless there's a feeling behind those ideas, the masculine energy will never do anything about it. That's the armchair philosopher who just talks, the dreamer who just has ideas, and the female, whether it comes from a man or a woman, says, let's do something about it. We want this to happen. I want to have children. I want to have a home. We need to have a business. And then the feminine, the Shakti power moves. But the point here is that the feeling nature of the feminine energy is not something that we either want to suppress or turn away from or denigrate in any way, or it is the heart and soul of what we're doing. And that's why the Shakti is always essential. The masculine energy by itself, even in all the cosmologies and philosophy, feeling is what moves us. And all of us in our lives, I told you my very brief story. I was moved toward the spiritual path because of a compelling feeling in my heart that there was something that I needed that I wasn't going to find. That I wasn't going to find in what was being offered to me. People told me, go get your university degree, become a professor, become a doctor, become a lawyer, because I was so argumentative. They all thought I'd be a great lawyer, which I'm sure I have been. I go into a law library now. This is just by the side. Ananda was involved in litigation for a number of years, and I had to help in it. We were attacked, not initiated, and I had to be the lawyer's assistant. As soon as I would go into a library of law books, I would fall asleep. No matter how awake I was when I walked in, this overwhelming sleepiness would come over me. I just couldn't even be where the shelves were. It was like, I've been there, I've done that, it's not going to work for me. But there was a feeling in my heart. Intellectually, I could have gone into all those things easily, but there was a feeling that was compelling me towards something else. I'm now perfectly calm feeling is Master's definition of intuition. Intuition is calm feeling, because feeling often cuts through all the different ideas. But if it's not calm, and this is where we come to the word emotion. Okay, emotion is what happens when our feelings get pulled away from their core, get pulled away from their connectedness with the greater reality. And because the feminine is oriented toward feeling, once that energy begins to move, it can move very far. And what we're always having to work with is to preserve the power of that pure centered feeling and be able to tell the difference when the feeling is running true, because it can be very passionate and have a tremendous amount of power. It's not a question of being sweet or being nice or anything like that. The feeling nature is the power of the universe. It's a question of whether or not feeling has shifted over into emotion. Okay, and this is the way. Okay, any questions or thoughts before I start going from there? All right. Whoa, there's a magnet on it. me just think about how this works. Everything about spiritual life is about coming from the center. You know, when we, and these are all, this is the spine. You might not be able to tell exactly, but we all, know in spiritual life we talk about the chakras and the heart center and all of these different aspects. All of meditation is about the strength of the center. Also, language is all dealing with about being centered. We use words like I feel off center today, I feel pulled out of my center, I feel scattered. All of those different ideas are all responding to the fact that we know that there's a flow of energy that when it's working properly takes us where we want to go, and when it's been dissipated it doesn't take us any place that we want to go. So our feeling nature, because it's part of our true spiritual self, the whole experience of living is from the time a little baby is born. Yogananda says that the sperm and the ovum come together. He actually describes there's a flash of light in the astral world, he says. This is Master's description. When the sperm and ovum come together, there's a flash of light in the astral world, and all those souls that are ready to incarnate, who are in tune with the vibration of that flash of light, move toward that flash of light to see if that's going to be their place to be. I mean, it's fascinating when you think about it. A friend of mine, this is actually in the Ananda movie, she talks about this. I mean, there's a whole way you can think of what she calls conscious conception, where you actually focus your attention in a certain way so that when that flash of light emanates, it will draw to you the kind of soul that you would like to have in your family. As Swamiji says, the man and the woman create the vehicle for the destiny of that soul to express, but they don't create the soul or the destiny. They just create the opportunity for that soul to express. So from that initial conception like that, I'm going to tell you a funny story, which is just such a fun story. When I was explaining this to a woman friend of mine, her son at that time was about 30 years old, and I told her about the flash of light in the astral world and the souls rushing to get in. Master said sometimes more than one gets in and you get twins or triplets. This mother started laughing. She said when her son was 5, he became very upset with her, as little boys can do with their parents. And so he was very mad. I don't like you at all, he said. And he was stomping off to his room, to sulk. And he decided he wanted to come back and really let her know what he felt. So he turned around and he came back and he said, "You weren't even my first choice." She knew nothing about reincarnation at that time or any of these teachings, but she was totally intrigued. "Darling, who was your first choice?" And then he just declared, "A lady in the Philippines, but she was taken." So when I told her this story, she said her son is a wonderful man, and he is. She said, and he's determined, but he has this quality. He starts in a certain direction, she said, and then he'll always pause and think about it a little bit. She could see him responding to the flash of light, moving toward that lady in the Philippines, but then stopping for a moment to think about whether he really wanted to do it. And then somebody else got in ahead of him. And then he was stuck having to wait for her. So he explained it. But what happens is that as soon as the sperm and ovum come together, Master explains this, that the first thing that happens is the spine is created. I mean, the spine is both the vehicle on an astral level for the chakras, which have gone with you from one incarnation to the next. The pattern in the chakras is what carries your karma from one physical life to the next. The physical body falls away, the astral body remains, and the pattern of energy in the chakras is what goes into the astral world. That's really who we are, is the vibrations there. That's a whole fascinating other subject. And that's what causes you to be in tune or not in tune with the flash of light, is the vibration that you are. So the first thing you do, Master said, is you, the soul, makes the spine. And the early little pictures of the forming embryo, it looks like a matchstick. It's just a straight line. Master says that's from the medulla to the base of the spine. And then gradually the energy is attracted in the womb to make the rest of the body on the pattern based on the chakras, which now begins to take physical form. In other words, we manifest from the center out. Everything in creation everything that's living is manifested from the center out. This is a fundamental spiritual principle. We don't start from the outside. If you're going to build a statue, you have a block and you start chipping away at it, and it's from the outside that you create it. Maybe by the time you're done, it's dynamic enough to have life force in it, but that life force was brought in from the outside. It didn't. You can't start with a tiny rock, and chisel it into something big. Whereas living things start with an idea, then an energy pattern, and then a materialistic expression. So that little matchstick gradually makes this whole body to be consistent with whatever the energy pattern is in there. And as soon as that body is formed, even right away from when a baby is born, I have no children, but I'm sure some of you do, or all of you do, and you know how that baby reaches out almost immediately. Just immediately, he or she, he'll reach for your hand. He'll try to nurse at the breast. I mean, it brings tears to your eyes even to think about it, how quickly they reach out. But you see, that is the direction of material incarnation, is that we push outward from the center. Of course, that's the problem with material incarnation, is that we push outward from the center. And some people never realize that there's a center from which I should be moving. And that's what causes us all the problem. The question was raised about anger, about stress. All of those are when we've pushed outward from the center and we've allowed ourselves to lose the source. And we have a feeling that the feeling can start positive. I really want to do a good job. I really want to get this done. I have a really creative idea. I hope I can say this. Often when I'm about to speak somewhere, Sunday mornings in our temple in Palo Alto, sometimes driving there with my husband, I'll say, I have a very nice talk to give today, and I usually say, if he lets me give it, meaning if Swamiji inspires me properly to do it. But I can never know for sure if it's really going to happen. There has to be, I have the feeling, but then I have to wait and see if I can hold that feeling strong enough to manifest it properly. Because when we can, we do great things. And if we really think of success in our relationships, success in our work, success in our creativity, it's always when we can have that feeling and hold it and spread out from it without ever disconnecting. Okay, this is the difference, I don't have it written there, between emotion and feeling. Emotion is when we push outward from that original core, which is why we're here. We're here to work. We're here to express ourselves. We're here to have those karmic forces push us and then to learn what they're going to teach us. But when we fulfill our task, we stay connected. When we lose the map, it's because somehow that feeling has shifted over and it's no longer connected. So I'm going to draw a picture on the wall. Does anyone have any questions, though, before I draw my picture? Okay. Where I live, in our community, there's this amazing tree. We have an apartment complex that serves us as a community in Palo Alto, where I live. If you go on the internet, you can see pictures of it. And we're very fortunate to have a big center area. And there's this extraordinarily huge elm tree right in the center. To my mind, it's the guru tree of the whole property. And it is so expansive in its reach that you can be quite some distance from the base of the tree and admiring some branch, and you'll suddenly realize that it goes all the way back to there. And of course, to make that possible, the roots of that tree, if you sort of stand and walk around it, you see how really extensive and deep and solidly based that is. And then it has an almost unlimited reach, because it's always balanced by the depth of its commitment to where it is on the earth. It's a perfect analogy for that balance of emotion and feeling, and this is what it would look like. I'll take my spine off here. If we think about ourselves, and it's a common symbol to think about ourselves as a tree, and I'm not a great artist here, but you get the idea. All the branches, how far they can go, and they go out in all directions, and then all these different little branches branch, and all these different branches start having little leaves, many, many zillions of little leaves. I won't draw them all, but you can imagine. And you end up with something that can be way expanded, extremely serviceful and beneficial to lots of different people, many, many different realities. Okay. And all of it comes from the trunk of the tree. If you cut the tree off here, none of these will continue to live. Okay? They'll all wither and die eventually. They simply can't survive without this connectedness. If you're also going to talk about what defines the tree, this leaf certainly is an aspect of the tree, and you can trace it all the way back to the core of what the tree becomes. Now, when we're living and expressing the feminine energy of feeling, we are always doing so in connection with the source. Now, ideally, for a person who is a serious sadhaka or a spiritual person in any way, we begin to understand what that source really is. The roots going down into our true divine nature, the life force itself being the divine power that's given to us, the opportunity to live our spiritual journey, whatever it might be. And we realize that everything that we're expressing, no matter how far out it becomes, is always an aspect of this, of the soul's response to the sperm and ovum, the pattern of the chakras being expressed, and the pattern of the chakras is the karma that we were born to work out, or the potential to create more, depending on sort of how we want to deal with it. And the point of all of that is one thing and one thing only, and that's the word that we've talked about already, is bliss. That when all obstacles, all interruptions to our true experience of who and what we are removed, there is a reality that's there. We don't create this. We don't have to earn it. We can never escape from it. We just experience more or less of it, depending entirely on our own awareness, and that's another word that's really vital to the spiritual path. Awareness is a fabulous word, because something can be completely true, but we're not aware of it. And we think the truth is changed because we're not aware of it. But when we become aware of it, that's why we call it self-realization. It's not self-creation, even self-acceptance. It's we actually find out something that was always there. So often what happens to us is we take our feeling and we express it out here, and it becomes a child that we're very deeply devoted to. It becomes a home that we love. It becomes an artistic pursuit that we really like. Now, what we identify with, what our self-definition is how we function in this world. If we always keep our self-definition at the core of our being, I am the infinite spirit who has assumed this individual expression because I'm on a journey to bliss, and this is the necessary land that I must go through. Yogananda described ego as the infinite self identified with the limited physical body. It hasn't become it, it's merely identified with it. So if we're defining ourselves as the trunk of the tree, then we can come all the way out here and we can have a family, we can have a home, we can have artistic pursuit, as long as we stay here. And then we can be passionately devoted to what we're doing. We can have, because some people try to deal with emotion by killing their feeling and trying to be indifferent to things. I don't want to be attached, I don't want to get too involved. We pretend an indifference, but that's not the same as expanding our awareness. It's just cutting ourselves off. It's if all the leaves were dead at the end of the tree, you would see that the tree wasn't really doing its job. But where emotion comes in is when we shift our sense of identification from the base and the source of what we're doing and define it only by this one thing. I am a mother, this is my son. I am a homemaker, this is my home. I am a wife, this is my husband. I am an artist, this is my work. Now see, what happens here is, the problem is, this is an eternal reality. This is the unchanging reality. Even when the physical body dies, this is where the astral energy comes from. This is where the chakras are. And it moves with us. But all of these leaves, so to speak, these all come and go. And these are also, to a very large extent, out of our control. And if you have identified yourself only with your son and his success in school, let's say, and he fails, then all of a sudden, there you go, right? If you have identified with this project and getting it done in a certain way, and your coworkers are not cooperating, or they fail to see your vision, or the situation, there doesn't seem to be quite enough time, and you've cut yourself off from the source and defined the source of your happiness as whether or not this succeeds, and it doesn't succeed, there you go again. So we can be, as I say, passionate about it as long as we stay connected. And the art of fully putting yourself into what's happening, but never defining yourself by it to such an extent that you lose this connection, is the balance between keeping emotion and feeling in place. Okay. Now I'm going to stop there and ask you to comment or question. Okay, you're all staring at me. What do you think?
Well, I'll just say that I'm sure it's very easy for many of us to get caught up in the leaf and to forget about our core. And, whether, in almost anything. Maybe when we're driving in Delhi traffic, all we're thinking about is getting home and all the traffic, and we've definitely forgotten about eternity and
and definitely when somebody honks.
Well, that's all the time.
Yes. So which is almost all of the time we are the lead and not connected to the rest of the fun.
But then it does put things in perspective, so we're no longer trying to change all of our, we usually focus on our coworkers and what they're doing wrong, rather than the trunk. Instead of the trunk.
So,
yes.
You talk about reincarnation a lot.
Yeah.
So, is there a way that we can access these memories of our past lives, so that we don't make the same mistake that we had done in the past, not repeat them again? Because somewhere I had read, I don't remember which book it was. Maybe it was one of the Yogananda books only. If we carry certain tendencies with us, and when we are acting, so all the time these tendencies, they keep coming up, and they sort of dominate our behavior. So how I know that it happens when you go in a state of meditation and through practice, but also how to know that the vision that you're having in your meditation is actually something coming from your past life, or it's something that your mind is making up?
I've had one past life dream that I know was true. It was to explain an extremely negative interaction I had with a woman who was really a very dear friend, and at the same time we could not get along at all. And I remembered in a dream that Swami confirmed, and I just knew it was true. You know, she'd had a lot of power over me, and she'd been horrible, really horrible. I mean, horrible, more than just like not nice, but really horrible. And so I was always afraid of her because I feared that she could ruin my life again, just to tell the story. I didn't tell her about that dream, but somehow or another she heard about it. So she went to some past life reader, and so she got the list of what I'd done to her. I mean, sure, she had to fight back somehow. And my actions against her were also really horrible. You know, just the kind of things you read in the newspaper. People do things with each other, to each other, and seem to get away with it. And Swamiji heard about the whole thing, and he basically said that he thought that both of our stories were true, that they were real, actual past life memories of, you know, antipathy, hatred, punishment. It happened. We see it all around us, and we think people get away with it. What it told me was fascinating, first of all, which is everything is happening at the same time, and the mere fact that I don't remember why had no effect on the way I perceived this person and the way she perceived me. So I realized that it's always happening. We don't know it's always happening, but it's always happening, which is why we so often get pulled out into emotion. Is that it's a cumulative result. I'm going to put a little bit about the chakras up here because it's the only way to understand it. So the first thing is, it doesn't make any difference whether you know where it's coming from. We always have to be very conscious of the fact of whether or not I am really acting from a center reality or whether I have wandered over to here and imagined that this person really has this much power over me, or that this person's opinion matters so much. And you can make up scenarios. They don't really have to be true. The word apocryphal is a very helpful thing when it comes to past lives, because even if you don't know the facts, you can recognize the irrational feelings that have moved you off the center and have caused you to identify with some peripheral reality here. But what I want to put on the board, I'm going to take off the tree for a moment. And I'm just going to put a very small picture, a little bit about the chakras, because this is what helps you understand, I think, best. If you think of the chakras, and we'll deal, it's primarily from the spiritual eye to the base of the spine. The crown chakra is not relevant for this conversation. If you think of just a person, another one of my marvelous drawings, and you know, you have the first chakra, the second chakra, the navel chakra, the heart chakra, the throat chakra, and that's the spiritual eye. Let's say here, you know, this is just to have a little picture here. All right. If you think of this being the earth chakra and this being the spirit, and it's what that represents is, this is reality defined as fixed matter. This is reality defined as infinite spirit. Now, every chakra has a positive dimension. This is a long, complicated subject. But if you think of this as a spectrum between, I believe that there's nothing real except the world I can see, the physical world, my physical body. When I die, it's all over. Might as well just enjoy myself because there's no other reality. Or I'm the only person in the world and I'm going to take from you as much as I can, because once you think about the material world, everything seems separate. Even though science tells us these ought to merge because these are the same energy, but there's this illusion of separateness. So every time we make a decision, have a feeling, take an action, have a thought, every time, we have made some perception of whether or not all of creation is one unified infinite spirit of bliss, or whether the apparent separateness that we're experiencing is reality. If I'm driving down the Delhi traffic and somebody is in a hurry to get home and cuts me off, and I lean out the window and call him terrible names and ask him what he thinks he's doing driving in front of me because you are making me late, we're affirming a certain separateness, aren't we? His need to get home means nothing to us. There's no unity even of feeling, of heart. But to speak of, I'm looking at the infinite spirit, Krishna himself has just cut me off on his motorcycle, you know, we are making a declaration. Now, because ego equals, you know, we'll use the word soul, the word jiva is a better word, soul identified, and we use the word body, but it means also physical and astral and causal body with the body. When I make that action, make that decision, I identify with it. It doesn't just pass through me. I have done it. Even if I forget, I have done it. I believe I have done it. I identify enough with my unique body. And we think it just goes away. I'm alone in the car. Nobody heard me say that, right? Except my driver maybe, and he's not going to tell anyone, okay? But what happened is that vibration of energy registers in whatever chakra corresponds to the perception of reality that we have just expressed. So if we consistently express a self-centered, I am the only reality there is, what I want is the only thing that matters, then this chakra begins to get lots and lots and lots and lots of energy. Okay? This is the chakra of willpower. If we constantly use our willpower, whether we use it for good or ill, this chakra begins to get a lot of energy. What it actually gets is vrittis, whirlpools. That's what the chakra is. It's a wheel. So it doesn't look like that. It looks like this. If we're consistently kind, the poor man on his motorcycle cuts in front of us, and we think, isn't that great? Because of his motorcycle, he can just get right ahead of me and get home faster. Or as his face flashes by, you think, oh, he doesn't look like a very happy man, you know, and you say a little prayer for his well-being. You have then affirmed a different level of reality than your annoyance because he inconvenienced me. And this is metaphysics. You absolutely cannot cheat the system. You can't game it in any way. You can't fake it out. You can't fake it out. You can't bribe it. Whatever you are perceiving, on that level you respond. And it doesn't go away. And over the course of a lifetime, or even more, many incarnations, there is a distribution of energy. These are called the vrittis, the whirlpools of energy, and this is actually your karma. It builds up. Now, the great news about this is that it isn't material. It isn't this big heavy table, this big wall. It's a pattern of energy. And a pattern of energy can shift in an instant. Just in faster than you can think about it, the energy can shift. And so you are always a work in progress. And as Master put it so sweetly, the only difference between a saint and a sinner is the way they behave, which is really odd when you think about it. But the only thing that makes a bad person is what they think and do. They have the same body, they have the same lungs, they have the same knees. They don't have a different fixed reality, but they constantly respond to life according to a certain vibration, and if that vibration is low, then they become a bad person. Now, the problem here is these are fields of energy, and they're whirlpools. Where I used to live at Ananda village all those years ago, there's a river, the Yuba River it's called. If you ever come to America, we'll take you to visit. It's deep in a canyon. It's a powerful river. And when you're by that river, you're conscious of two realities. One is the flow, that river is going to the sea. I mean, the ocean is hundreds of miles away, but it is on its way. And the other thing is that lots of it just kind of gets distracted from the main job. And instead of some of the water, all the water heading for the sea, lots of it just whirls around. It whirls around here, it whirls around there, it gets into an eddy here, it sits behind a rock over here. And because there's some center point, usually of a block or a rock or something, that draws the energy into that whirlpool, and it just keeps it whirling. So with us, we may have some energy at the spiritual eye. We meditate, we have high aspirations, we may have a loving heart, we have a very positive intention, we may have the desire to communicate in a harmonious and a positive way. That's the river trying to head for the sea. But along the way, it meets the fact that I like getting my own way. And even though I want to be harmonious, I want to be harmonious because everybody is doing it my way, right? I actually realized once that it had puzzled me my whole life when I would be in meetings that after I expressed my opinion, they all kept talking about the subject. It was like this sort of subconscious dis-ease that I had felt for years, and I finally put my finger on it. But I have spoken. Why are you still talking about it? You know, this memory of being a monarch or a queen or who knows what. But it always confused me. But of course, they didn't see it that way. But this effort of self-will, or to put it more positively, I'm a very creative person. I have lots of ideas, and I like my ideas. Most of the time, I prefer my ideas to other people's ideas. Not really because mine are better, but just because they're mine. Sound familiar? When you have a staff of creative people? Yeah, because it came from me and I liked it, right?
So I am right.
Yes, okay. Well, I'm right. Yes, actually. Except if you and I were together, and then of course I'm right. But, but since you spoke up, I'll give you the vote. But that becomes an energy. So whereas one wants to be supportive and love everyone, the habit of wanting to do it my way, it sucks some of the river into that whirlpool. Just as simple as that. And you end up saying things sometimes you didn't even mean to say, because you were heading for another reality, just like the river is heading for the sea, but whoosh, all of a sudden you're over here. And sometimes you find yourself, well, to use the other analogy, way out here on a leaf, when you actually thought you were heading right up the center trunk. Now, and so that to answer your question, that is the fundamental difficulty, is that we have built a pattern of energy, and because this is a non-physical reality, death doesn't touch it. The physical body is built around this, and we actually manifest a physical body, whether human, male or female, culture, race, everything that we do, that gives us the opportunity to properly express this pattern. This is how evolution takes place even through the animal forms. Animals have a spine and they have chakras, different, less evolved. But when your consciousness is big enough to be a lizard, you get to be a lizard. And then you're a lizard until you've just exhausted the possibility of lizardness, and you have more energy in you, more refinement in you than can be expressed as a lizard. So after the lizard body dies, maybe you get to be a cat, or a dog, or a horse, or a monkey. And in our physical world now, when you're in the astral world and that flash of light comes, you find a place that's going to give you a chance to be who you're trying to be this time. And again, this is metaphysics. You can't bribe this. You just blend in right where you're supposed to blend in. And then you get the chance to practice. And of course, what the point is here is that we are trying, it's not that we don't use all these chakras, because if we incarnate in a physical body on the physical world, we have to be part of the earth element. We don't get out of this by just pretending it's not there. Just becoming, completely, ungrounded is the word, just floating around. But ideally, you see, all of these energies are guided from divine consciousness, and the energy circulates like this instead of draining out. People talk about chakras being blocked. They're not so much blocked as they have holes in them. And we keep affirming a reality that is not our bliss reality. And the way we change this is we simply start adding energy where we want it to be. And the positive thing about this is the actual flow of the river is toward the spirit. So even a little, well, Krishna said it, even a little practice of this inward religion frees us from dire fears and colossal sufferings, because this energy is stronger and better. Because when you're adding energy, well, if you have a flow of a river, for example, and you increase the outlet at the far end of it, then the river flows stronger, correct? And so when you begin to attune yourself at the spiritual eye through meditation or prayer or uplifted thinking, there's many different ways to bring energy here, you've increased the outlet. And so the energy will flow stronger. And looking at the physical river, as soon as the flow of the river has more force than the whirlpool just gets sucked into it. And you don't ever have to even know the whirlpool was there. You don't have to go into extensive past life regression and find out why. You can just increase the flow and dissolve it. Now, sometimes you have to dive into the vritti, into the whirlpool, and figure out what it's about and dismantle it. But sometimes you just have to increase the flow. Now,
but is there a need to know the past life thing? I mean, just keep increasing the flow.
This is the metaphysics of why people say, don't worry about anything, just meditate. If you meditate properly, with enough energy, you increase energy, well, you can start from the heart, you increase energy here sufficiently that every whirlpool is drawn in to the river. For most people, more is required, just because most of us can't meditate with that much strength. But in principle, that's all you have to do. And in Autobiography of a Yogi, they talk about Kriya Yoga and the power of it. The power of Kriya is that it very strongly draws all those whirlpools into the river. It's a very powerful technique for doing that, and therefore it speeds up the process greatly. Now, what we also need to know about this is that this system never sleeps. It never goes off duty, which means that no matter how apparently trivial the action is on your part and how incidental it may seem to every external measurement, you're always building a pattern in your chakras, and that pattern in your chakras is going to define everything that happens after that, including your future incarnations. This is the bad news, and this is also the good news, because it means you can always be changing your destiny, literally. But it means even if you're alone in your car and you respond to a situation by allowing your feeling to move over into emotion and to lose track with your center energy, or you can say on this spectrum you're affirming a reality you don't want to affirm, it matters. Not because God is watching and will punish you, but because your own nature is being formed by your responses. Now, to come specifically, and we can, I'll give you a moment to speak in just a moment. You spoke of anger and stress earlier. Almost always, the big issues in our life, the big moments, I'll think of terms of relationships, let's say, or I'm always calm except when there's deadlines. I'm always nice except when she's involved. I'm always forgiving except for this one person in my life. Usually, whatever the big aberrations are, the big ones where we move off course, almost always, I will say always, that same habit is present as a thread all the way through. It's just you don't think it's important, so you haven't noticed. A tendency to react with stress, to react with anger. Who didn't do the dishes? Who left the cup here right now? Or we keep talking about the traffic. He's always cutting me off like that. Or my son, he does this. And you may just let it go. But what you're dealing is you're cutting a pattern. You're building a pattern in your chakras so that when the energy tries to go in a certain direction, it will fall into that whirlpool. And for most of us, whatever those giant issues are, they're very difficult to dismantle directly. Like this woman friend I had, she had arranged to have my husband killed in some incarnation. It was hard for me to be real nice to her because I still remembered, right? And there was not much I could do. But I realized how many other areas I tended to hold people responsible for things I didn't like that they were doing. I had a hard time just taking people for what they were. And you have to you start practice, the words, it's very simple. It's a really important mantra. You have to practice when it is easier. Okay? You practice when it's easier, but then you begin to build a whole new pattern in the chakras. So when something irritates you, you have practiced, being generous about it, being calm about it, or being strong in yourself about it instead of just flashing out in anger. And so it's amazing how quickly you can shift your habits if you approach it essentially from the bottom up, from the small place. Okay? So even just in the work environment, what is the habit of response? How quickly do we respond? How impatient do we get with small things? How courteous are we? How much do we pull back into the heart or pull back into the trunk of the tree? How often do we allow these vrittis to dictate our behavior instead of remembering that our chakras are always listening? We need to be careful. Okay. Yes, questions.
If we are calm and nice all the time, when people start taking for granted, the other person will think, oh, I got my way,
That's a very
I
good
was
question.
right. So, and on the other hand, you're trying to practice and you know that the chakras are listening. So
It is the nature which dictates the chakras which transform the nature.
Chakras are first. Your nature comes after. Your nature is the expression.
They are seen that way,
Well, because your chakras existed before you were born, before you were expressing your nature. So, but yes, it gets to be a fine line, but no, metaphysically speaking. But the question here, now it just slipped out of my head. Oh yes, people will take advantage. Do we need to take a break before we go on? Because I can answer this question and then we'll. Are you all right? Okay.
Do you need?
No, I'm fine. I can go forever, seemingly. Okay, I'm going to take this off the board here because it's kind of ugly. We often think that the goal of spiritual life is to be nice. Okay? The goal of spiritual life is not to be nice. That doesn't mean you can be not nice, but the goal of spiritual life is freedom. And it's freedom to choose the highest path in all circumstances. And sometimes you appear nice, and sometimes you do not appear nice at all. But you are responding according to freedom. Another word for freedom, and it's a very good word, is the word dharma. And the definition of dharma in this context is that action which leads to higher consciousness. And it's not duty like you have a dharma to your family necessarily, you might. But dharma is that action which leads to higher consciousness, in other words, which leads to freedom. We need to be able to act according to the highest within us at all times. We need to be not compelled by habit, by other people's opinions, if those opinions conflict with dharma. And sometimes we can be very nice because no harm, But what we really need to be is and this is a very important word, is we need to be appropriate. Now, appropriate, I don't mean socially appropriate. Now, I have to condition all of this with saying I'm an American and we're so individualistic. And I know that one of the positive things about Indian society is that your families and so on are much stronger. So some of what is easy from my culture is more difficult for you, but it doesn't change the principle. And appropriate is that it is consistent with Dharma. And therefore appropriate is that those actions which lead to higher consciousness. And that doesn't mean just for me, but for everybody involved. Now, none of this is about nice. Okay, appropriate means that we need to be helpful, and we need to be helpful to ourselves. Now, when we think about appropriate, it's not a selfish philosophy. Dharma is not selfish. But sometimes people think that you as an individual are less important than everyone around you. You're neither less important nor more important. Everybody is equal before God. Everybody is equal in their divine nature. So you have to evaluate what is righteous for you, what will move you in Dharma toward freedom, what will help them, what will help this person, and you have to vary, and the word is impersonally. You have to look at it in a very impersonal manner. What is his need? What is my need? Not what is his preference, what is her desire, what is her habit, but what is really Dharma here? What will really move everyone to a higher level of understanding, to a greater awareness? Which means if people are really impinging on you in ways that is not just, oh, I don't like the tone of his voice. You know, I wish he were nicer when he talked to me, or who does he think he is? That's not necessarily about Dharma. In fact, being bound by small considerations like that is contrary to freedom. To be bothered just because someone has a habit. My husband, my dear and wonderful husband, his family used the minimum number of words to express everything. I feel like the whole family had like a very small quota of words. They were born with very few. So they always used the fewest number. That's how he was trained. And my husband is a great devotee, has been. He's actually become almost talkative lately. I've been with him for 30 years. But especially at the beginning, it was like the fewer words, the better. You might ask why I would marry such a man, and I can give you lots of reasons. But my family, my brother was a champion debater. I was in theater, and I was also in debate. You know, we lived on words. Just, you know, more than supper, we lived on words. So I married this man who will say the least number of words possible. And so when I don't understand someone, I tend to say, excuse me, I couldn't quite understand that. Would you mind repeating it? My husband says, what? Now, those of you who are not young brides know how many incredible disharmonious moments happen over the most ridiculous things which you don't realize for a while. I shed more tears over the word what than I'm ashamed to admit. Every time he would say what, I would just take this as this huge thing. And he would just look at me and then he would say, what? Now, my freedom and my Dharma were for me to understand what he meant by that word. I kept trying to get him to change. He didn't even know there was a problem. And he would actually say to me, there's no problem. I just didn't understand you. But I reacted. I moved from the core of the tree over to a leaf. The way he asked me to repeat myself was such a big deal that the marriage kept hitting the ground over it. I mean, I can say it lightly now, it was no joke. It was not a joke when it was happening. Okay, but my freedom and my expanded awareness was in tuning into who he really is and what he really meant. And I finally got it. I realized he means nothing by that word. He's just, I mumble. He didn't hear me, that's all. Thank God he wanted to hear it. Instead of just being really grateful that he didn't hear me, right? So an appropriate response has to start first with what's really motivating me. Have I allowed myself to get over out here into a leaf where something really trivial has become my issue? Or is it appropriate? That this person is really not behaving properly. And I will not do that person any favor by being nice, by letting him think that he can be so careless, so unconscientious, so unkind. But then we have to be impersonal about it. That I'm reacting with freedom, appropriately, to what he's actually done. I had to learn the difference between being nice and being spiritual. When I was 19, I realized that I was very nice, but the core of my being nice was not really that I loved people. The core of my being nice was that I was afraid of people. And so I was always nice because I was afraid not to be nice. And there was no freedom in that. Fortunately, this revelation came to me when I was living in an apartment in Manhattan, New York City. I lived there for 3 months. I'm a California girl. California girls are real nice, and we're easygoing. New Yorkers are different. They are, to my mind, rude and pushy and loud. And so I got to practice responding with that energy to get over my fear of just saying what I had to say, instead of always trying to make sure that everybody was where they were supposed to be. And in New York, what I thought was just outrageous behavior was just ordinary. Nobody even noticed. You're cutting in front of my line, get back behind me. I want that, I got here first. That was just like so far outside of my way of functioning, but in New York I got to practice. And I got a lot freer. And I began to understand that for me, not being nice was my dharma, because the goal is freedom. And then I began to enjoy not being nice. And I realized that I'd gone far enough, and I backed up to a point that was more appropriate for me. But now, when necessary, which is not often, but when necessary, I can stand up. And I never have to shy away from difficult confrontations, hard conversations. I'm just not afraid of it anymore, where I was terrified of it before. So I had to be not nice for a while until I found my natural footing. Does that make sense? Okay. What are your thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I want to know what role does our thoughts play in, we talked about these whirlpools and these, in creating these vrittis in first place and then dissolving them. Can we do it consciously and being aware of what we are doing, and then be able to dissolve them with that awareness?
Absolutely. Thought precedes action, even if we act so fast that we don't have a chance to evaluate the thought. But before you act, there's always a thought. So if you can restrain the action and reduce it to the thought, then to that extent you have put out less energy toward a particular vibration of reality that is registered in your chakras. And if you can change your thoughts, of course, all your actions will change because your impulse will be different. A friend of mine who is a very, very sweet person, she was a real teacher to me because she had such a loving heart. I tended to think more about things, and she tended to always remember people. And she was the manager of a certain enterprise in our community, and some other woman, as it happened, had a supervisory role over her situation and made certain decisions that she really didn't like. and I happened to be there, and she was expressing some agitation with these decisions. How could she be making that decision from that point? She doesn't really understand what's going on here. I don't know why she, bothered. Why didn't she contact me? All the things that go through your head. And my friend had to walk about half the distance of this room from where we were standing talking to where the telephone was, where she was going to call this woman and talk to her. So she's standing with me expressing her displeasure. As she starts to make this very short trek across the room, she says, that woman has the nicest children. She has to raise children in addition to working full time. She pauses and says, I don't have any kids. I don't know how she does it. How does she do her job and her children? And such good children, too. She must really have a lot on her mind all the time. And she just sort of started doing all this. By the time she dials the number, from here to here, it was, instead of, why did you do that? It was, hi, how have you been? I heard that Gita, her daughter's name, I heard Gita, did so-and-so, like this. And she just moved from one chakra to the other, and then actually had exactly the conversation that she wanted to have. She didn't hold back a single thought, but she was standing inside of that woman's reality when she did it. And she just moved from what about me to what about us? Who are you? What's going on? Now, not everybody is as nice as that, and she was able then to make a very good connection. They still disagreed, actually, as it happened, but they disagreed respectfully, and were able to move forward with that. I slightly lost the first part of what you asked me. Can you remind me of did I answer your question, or was it?
No, I'd ask you how thoughts.
Oh, how thoughts do it, right, exactly. So by shifting her awareness of that other person, by the time she took action, there was, see, what the other person at the other end of the line felt was that they were together instead of that they were apart. Swami Kriyananda put it to me, I was having a very hard time getting along in this certain committee that I was part of. And he just said to me, why don't you try to think what that person is trying to accomplish? And that became so stunningly helpful to me. I tried to think, this man in this one particular case, I thought his plans were just awful. And I thought my plans were much better. But I tried to just get inside him and what is he trying to accomplish? And I really felt even that what I was suggesting would accomplish what he wanted better. But instead of starting by criticizing what he had proposed, I talked to him about what he wanted to accomplish. And when he really felt that I was trying to accomplish the same thing and that I was with him, just as simple as that, I was with him, that's the heart chakra. I was with him, then we could talk about the best way to get there. I found that with Swami Kriyananda, whom I related to as a disciple. He was a very creative man, and he had often had many ideas, and the natural inclination of a disciple would be to say, yes, sir, if that's what you want. But Swami Kriyananda did not want us to behave that way. He wanted us to be engaged and to use our creativity and to really think. And sometimes Swamiji did not have the best idea, or there were details of the circumstances, especially as Ananda got bigger, where he just didn't know certain facts. So early in my discipleship, when I didn't agree with him, I would just disagree with him, which did not go over really big. It did not take either of us where we wanted to go. So it got to be that if I didn't feel that I didn't understand, I'll put it that way, or I didn't agree with something he suggested, I would stand back and I would try to feel, what is he trying to accomplish? And when I could feel what he was trying to accomplish, then I could sometimes say, well, sir, if we do it like this, and then I could respond to what he was trying to accomplish. And if it was a better idea, he would always say, well, that's a good idea, let's do it that way. But I could never get there if I just said no, or if I just criticized, because there was no unity. And during the break and just before, the question was asked about changing other people. And you asked it, Rena, about if you can actually see that you do have a better idea. And it does happen. It's a question, I don't have the word up there, but it's a question of awareness. If your awareness is more expansive than the other person's awareness, either overall or in this particular incident, they may be setting in motion a cause and effect, the consequences of which they can't see, but because you have a greater sense of awareness, you see where it's going, and you know it's not going where they want it to go. This is a very dicey area. It's families and friends are different than work associates, because in work associates you may have a responsibility to a project, but of course everybody works better if they feel loved and respected. Nobody does their best work when they feel disrespected or afraid. So it is in the best interests of the whole team, but sometimes...
And in work we have a goal, a fixed goal.
Exactly.
So we all need to accomplish that, and we all
Exactly. That's why work is a little tricky. But here, yes, in families, that's why I say the rules are slightly different. Sometimes the project simply has to be put first, and you simply cannot allow everybody time to figure it out. So I have to answer on both points. Swami Kriyananda had the goal with all of us, which was to bring us to God realization. That's a pretty major goal. And he had all the time in the world to accomplish that goal. He had this incarnation, and he had whatever further incarnations it takes. But he was also masterful at always seeing it from our point of view and not having any personal need to have things come out a certain way. I mean, everybody can tell when you're saying it's for the good of the project, but it's really just for your convenience. I mean, people have a very strong intuition when you're using high principles just to get your own way. So the first principle in helping other people is that you have to really want to help them. And that doesn't mean it's the same point here. It's not like you're always nice. It's not like they always get your way. If you have bottom line responsibility and the deadline has to be met, I mean, you all are working on a deadline. You can't give people all the time in the world to work it out because the paper has to be published. But if you genuinely want what is good for them, and even if you can't cooperate with them, you still have that in your heart. People read your heart. And some people are just unkind, and they will always be mad at you, even if you're right. But what we have to work with, also from the point of view of the chakras, is we have to work with our true intentions. You know, do we really want, and the extent to which we really don't like this person and get satisfaction from putting them down, which so-and-so really annoys us, or we have some not quite formed past life memory of the pleasure of getting one up on this one. That's our project. And that is slightly separated from how you behave, because you may still have to exercise your authority, move the project forward, hold your position simultaneously while you work on purifying your heart in relationship to that person. But Swami Kriyananda was always impersonal about it, and even when he was stern, you never felt that he got any pleasure out of the opportunity to be harsh with you. He did it if it was needed, and it was because he was clean inside, and that of course is a tricky business. But the other side of that is people will never learn something until they're ready to learn it. And now we come back to family and relatives. It's like you can explain it, you can be absolutely correct. My friend taught me this very early on, because you can see I can put a lot into words. I can say everything that I think. It's not that I actually think more, I just can say everything I think. So my friend said to me, "You explain my shortcomings to me more clearly than I want to know them." And she didn't say I wasn't right, because I was right. But what she was saying to me is, this is not helping me. And so I had to stand back and think, well, you know, I can show off and show how clever I am. Mm-hmm. I can have the satisfaction of just putting her down and charting out what she ought to do. But is this really appropriate? What am I accomplishing here? What is my real goal? I mean, your goal may be to get the newspaper out. Your goal may be to have a loving family. Your goal may be to raise a child who has strength and confidence. Your goal may be to keep harmony in your house. But you have to ask yourself, what is my goal, and is this an appropriate way to reach that goal? And what Swamiji would do is he always had a terrific sense for when we were ready to hear it. And he cautioned all of us, don't tell people anything that they're not ready to hear. Because not only will they reject it, they will also get in their mind that you don't know what you're talking about. And later on, when they might be even slightly open to it, they'll just say to you, oh, you already said that. And so what is your goal? If your goal is really to help people, articulating it just doesn't do anything. I had the most ridiculous experience with this about how experience is the only teacher. My husband always told me not to put the suitcases on the hood of the car because they would scratch the car. He said this to me for decades. Finally, I was alone somewhere with his car. And I had what looked to me like a soft-sided suitcase, and it was just easier to lift it onto the hood of the car instead of putting it on the ground, which was dirty. And then when I needed it, I pulled it off like that. And what do you know? The little metal feet just scratched a big thing right in the hood of his car. Besides having scratched his car, which was not such a happy moment, I said, look at that. If you put the suitcases on the hood of the car, it'll scratch the hood of the car. He must have told me that 100 times. But what was so impressive to me, really impressive to me, was that I never believed him. And I thought, how many times have I explained things to people? Now, what you really ought to do is this, and can't you see if you behave like that, then this will happen? And of course they couldn't understand me, because you don't understand it until you're right there at the edge and see it for yourself. Now, then you have to ask yourself, what is my goal? Is my goal to have the satisfaction of explaining to everybody in my house just exactly how they should behave and how they have it all wrong? Or do I really want to help them to expand their own consciousness and move toward freedom? But you can see what a discipline this is for you, because we're always wanting to say it out there. But if you can really, really be committed to people's well-being and win their belief that you're not really in it for yourself, you're really in it for them, then you can tell people almost anything and they'll listen to you. But if you've lost that credibility, you have to reestablish it before you can be of any help to them. Does that make sense? It's one of the most difficult. I mean, everything is about other people. If we could just have our own way all the time, it would be a lot simpler. Comments or thoughts or questions?
So, but coming back, even if they don't want to hear a home truth, but you need to give it to them. Even if they're not ready to hear it.
But you have to, because it has to be said. First of all, I would make sure it has to be said. Secondly, I would try to think what part of it they might be more willing to hear. Ask yourself try to find the place where you're likely to have the most success. And then whatever that is, really stop and think. Here's several things that I found really helpful. One is, I try to make sure that I am as centered as possible in the conversation. That there's no pleasure on my part in finally really being able to say my mind. I find that if you're sitting with a person and you're really going to have to tell them something difficult, try really hard to settle into your heart chakra, and without making a big deal about it, as much as you possibly can, try to feel that energy from the other person. The heart chakra is when the boundaries between us begin to dissolve. In a work situation, the people you're dealing with, you may have no real emotional connection to them, but everyone leaves this office and has a real life and has the same feeling. So to be calmly centered enough in yourself that you're really vibrating on that level is much different than if you just come in from your mind and are going to say it. I've also found, every one of us has our human dimension and also our superconscious dimension. And we haven't actually touched the other half of this, which is how to enjoy what you have to do anyway. But the way to enjoy what you have to do anyway is realize that everything that you're doing is an opportunity to expand your consciousness. We've touched on it by my talking about the chakras. So everybody who you come in contact with has the same divine destiny. And they are all also being guided from the superconscious level to work out their karma exactly as they are doing right now. They might not be responding real well, but they are standing at the sum total of all their incarnations right in this minute, right in front of you. And their soul is trying to take them to bliss, just as your soul is trying to take you to bliss. So I often find if I'm just sitting in front of someone with a difficult message to deliver, I actually pray to that person's higher consciousness. And before I speak, I just sort of look at them. I mean, this is with people who are emotionally close to you, your father, your mother, your husband, your children, and your coworkers. And silently, maybe while you're talking about the weather or getting the tea, you say silently, how can I help you? Where are you trying to go? What is appropriate to help you, move you toward freedom? What is Dharma for you in this moment? I've had astonishing results with that. Results in two ways. One is that suddenly they will feel that you're really on their side. And even if the message you're delivering is painful for them, but they'll still feel the truth of it because they'll feel that you really want to help them. Also, sometimes amazing intuitions will come to you that would never have occurred to you. You'll just be guided to start the conversation or speak in a way that just never crossed your mind before, that literally comes from them to you. And sometimes you will, this is my most fun one, you will completely forget what you were going to say and you won't think about it for 2 or 3 weeks. It'll just be snatched out of your mind because their soul will essentially reach you and say, don't do this, it's not going to help. I mean, that's more in a personal situation where that'll come. Sometimes in work you have to go forward anyway. In other words, respect the person you're talking to as having a soul nature just like you do. Swamiji often emphasizes the word respect. And actually, we were having conversation here earlier about dealing with yourself, and I didn't use that word respect, but it's a very important word. We all want to be perfect in what we do, and when you get onto a spiritual path, the perfection is absolute. It's not like you can just be good at your job. It's like you're trying to be perfect in all of your responses. And the fact of the matter is, we're just not going to be, because we have karma. That's why we're here. If we didn't have karma, we wouldn't be here. So necessarily, it's going to be a circuitous path to the goal. It's not going to be a straight line. And so, but we have to respect the sincerity of our own intentions, and we have to respect our own goodness on this path. And it's not pleasing to God if we don't respect ourselves, because we're not in truth. Because if you're sincere about your effort to improve yourself, that's cause for great celebration. The fact that you haven't quite managed to do it as well as you wanted to is quite incidental. And so you're talking to someone and they may be terribly incompetent and just filled with flaws and just behaving badly in every way that you can measure. But they're heading for bliss just like you. And they should be respected for that. And sometimes, however, the appropriate response, what their soul wants from you, is a very strong response. Sometimes you really have to offer it, and you pray to God and you pray to them. And sometimes you have to say, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to have to do this now. You're going to have to steel yourself. You say this inwardly. You're going to have to steel yourself because this is what I really feel to do. And you see, all of that is based on the intention that you're not just indulging your own vrittis, but you really want what is best for them. Swami Kriyananda, he wanted the best for each one of us, and we it was unmistakable. And he could get, it was amazing. He could get people in the room who completely disagreed with each other, and he could make you all feel that he was on your side. And he did it, he was masterful. I was involved in a situation once where there was a certain action that I had been assigned to carry forth. And Swamiji had given me the assignment, but other people strongly opposed the action that I was going to take. And Swamiji, even though he had seemingly approved of it and even assigned it to me, he still respected the people who disagreed. And so people were phoning him left and right with their side of the story. And he had this line, "I understand why you feel that way," which I have used many times since then. It's perfect. You haven't agreed, you haven't disagreed, you haven't actually taken a position, but you have said, "I understand why you feel that way," and he did. It wasn't a technique. It was so-and-so expressed these fears or these opinions or this, and he said, "Well, I understand why you feel that way." And see, as soon as you do that, you're standing with them. And then even after that, "I understand why you feel that way, but as it happens in this particular circumstance, we're going to have to do this." I mean, Swami never had to finish the sentence, but you can then finish the sentence. I got in the habit when I was working with someone who was very difficult and was always coming up with, in my opinion, harebrained ideas. But I got in the habit of saying, "Wow, that's a really original thought. Gee, how could we make that work?" And I would just say yes, yes, yes. And then they would immediately relax. And they could tell. And it wasn't a technique. It was an amazing thought. How could you ever have come up with an idea like that? That's just so off the wall. You know, but wow, that's an amazing thought. Then once we were standing together, we could start talking about whether or not we could actually do it. Or sometimes they would make requests of me that I couldn't fulfill, but I learned to say, "Gosh, I'd really like to do that for you first." And then you say, "But these are the things we're going to have to think about." But you see how different that is? If you say no, I see it's all about unity, and it's all about helping people, and it's all about respect. You know, even if someone has a genius for bad ideas, that's really something to respect, isn't it? Okay? And so appropriate is always to be helpful. Okay. Other thoughts or questions here?
Also, sometimes people would listen to you more if you are practicing it yourself. If I was to instruct it, my sister, for instance, if I was to tell her something, it helps. She's more open to the ideas if I had already worked on them myself. If I'm just passing off some gyan from here to her, I never see her pick it up.
Right. The relevant word, which is a word we haven't put on the board yet, is the word magnetism. People are much more affected by your magnetism than they are by your words. And if your words are the right words but have the wrong magnetism is the vibration of energy that you're putting forward. If your magnetism is, "This is inconvenient for me and I want you to be different. I'm afraid and I need you to be different because I'm afraid. This is inconvenient for me and I need you to be different because it's inconvenient for me." When I was caring for my parents toward the end of their lives, I realized at a certain point that I was really not thinking of their welfare, I was thinking of my convenience. And when I really realized that it was just my convenience, now I still had to make certain adjustments because I simply could not carry on in the way that the circumstances required. But when I realized that I really wasn't thinking of them, I was thinking of me. And, you know, mothers know their daughters. My mother could tell that my whole magnetism was self-concern and not real concern for her. And the other way that magnetism works is you don't have any power behind this thought. There's no power there. It is literally out of a book, and it sounds good, and you want to impose it on them. But they can feel that there's no magnetism. That was was it Mahatma Gandhi, who some mother asked him to tell her son not to eat so much sugar, and he had to wait a week to say, don't eat so much sugar, because he had to stop eating it himself. I mean, you don't have to be, you can say, I read this in a book and it seems like a good idea. Yeah. But you just need to be truthful about it and not pretend that this is your own wisdom if you're offering it. Swami Kriyananda said to me, you think you do more good by doing more, he said, but you really do good when you have good magnetism. Because people are changed by the feeling of things. That's what magnetism is about. And your ideas can be completely daffy, but you'll still be able to help people because if your magnetism is supportive and uplifted to them. One of my best friends, it's not her advice that I love, although she can be wise sometimes. It's the fact that she just has such great loving energy. And it just being with her always makes me feel better. It's not anything particular she says or anything we do, but she has great magnetism, and her magnetism is, you're such a wonderful person, I just love being with you. And that if we can just keep projecting that, then most of the time, we all know what we should do. We just have some complicated reason why we can't. And so that's the other reason why you don't want to just give people stories, because often they know, and it just makes you feel worse. Yeah, and that's what you hear people. Yes, yes, I know. Yes, yes, I know. I know, I know. Yes, 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 yes. I know, I know. Whenever anybody's saying that to you, stop talking. Really just stop. And just find another way to go at it. Because what you've done is you've just cornered somebody. And nothing's going to happen from that. Swami Kriyananda can say, as I heard him say once, you do not know, otherwise you would be different. But you have to be him before you can say that. The other thing I talk about is, I call it talking down a tube. When you're talking to someone, and even if they're right next to you, you feel them psychically moving away from you, and you're calling to them down a long tube. And you can just tell it, just stop, because your magnetism is not helpful at this point. Work situations, I know, are slightly different. Sometimes you just have to go on. But even then, if you're talking down a tube and everybody has moved away from you, you may accomplish something, but you won't accomplish as much as you will if you can. Even if you just stop and fix yourself. Yeah. Well, we have allotted another half an hour, but if we can't fill it, we don't have to fill it. Is there more?
Okay, the eternal question about doing your dharma and doing your duty.
Right.
Which in India, of course, is
Right.
one of those. You're stuck in a bad marriage, you're there for your life.
Right.
You have to look after your parents, it's your duty, you'll do it.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
Right.
Things work differently here as you would have.
I've come to appreciate that, yes.
Yeah, but sometimes it's appreciation, sometimes it's my karma. It's
Right.
a colleague of mine calls marriage a karma cleanse. What do you say?
Karma
cleanse.
cleanse.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it's interesting because I've been actually trying to tune into that just in the last week or so, just talking mostly to women, but just to everyone, just sort of feeling that. The word dharma does not mean duty. That is not an accurate definition of duty, of dharma.
I said that's different.
Right, no, but I mean, it's an important thing. Now, the mere fact that other people tell you that it doesn't mean that that's true. Duty is a very simplistic and, generally speaking, not helpful definition of dharma. Dharma is that which expands consciousness. Now, sometimes doing your external duty is the way to expand your consciousness, because the reasons that you don't want to do it are actually confining to you. They are selfish, selfish in the sense of increasing your separation from God. I don't mean selfish in the sense of considering your well-being as well. In this culture, as one woman put it to me recently, because I'm in the habit of saying, as an American, well, it's your life. And she said to me, no, it's not my life at all. I was never raised to think it was my life. My life belongs to the whole family, to the whole situation I'm in. I can't, she felt she couldn't define herself that way. Daya and I were talking about this, and I asked her, how did Swami Kriyananda respond to this when he was here in India? And he often told people, just because your family wants you to marry, it's your life. You don't have to go along with what they want. Just because your parents expect you to follow a certain course, it's your destiny. In the end, you have to stand before God. And in the end, every individual has a responsibility to move towards Satchidananda. Unfortunately, many of the people who are close to you want you to stay in the mold that they think is the right mold. And they don't necessarily have the wisdom or the unselfishness to actually perceive what your best interest is more than just the little circle in which they're standing. I think often that is the karmic challenge, which is to be able to be strong enough in your own sense of what God really wants from you, to not be deflected from that merely because other people don't like it. The problem is that is a very subtle line between just choosing your own convenience and sacrificing other people's well-being and choosing your own actual dharma, even if others are upset with you. And I would say that people who are, born into a circumstance in which that is a constant cutting edge, then that's really your karma in it. Swamiji, speaking of marriage particularly, he said there's no particular victory in finishing an incarnation in a marriage if the cost is your spiritual welfare. And so sometimes to stay in it is actually your best spiritual welfare, because you have to discipline yourself, you have to sacrifice desires that you may have. So it gets to be a very fine line that is not always easy to discern all by yourself. But it's very important to remember, because all these people in your life are here for one incarnation, and yes, you all may reincarnate together again, but your inner reality and your relationship to divine consciousness, it started long before you were in the circumstances and will go on long after. And so it's vital that we understand this in the right way. And we're in a shifting time where, all the forms of things are changing. Look at this, you're all career women. A couple of generations ago, it was just out of the question that you would all be working like this. And so much of what people are expecting of each other is not based on what's really going on now. An Indian friend of mine from the Palo Alto, whose father has passed away and he's the eldest son, he was on his way from California to Mumbai, and he told me, he asked me to actually pray that he would be able to persuade his sister to marry the man that they had found for her to marry. I talked to him a little bit. She has an advanced degree. She's just started working. She's having a great time in her career. If she marries this man, she has to move to another city. She has to lose her job. I looked at him and I said, why would she want to marry this man? I said, you committed to educating this woman to a very high level so that she could actually perform. If you wanted her just to be a housewife, you shouldn't have done all of those things. It's the most reasonable thing in the world that she would say, I'm not ready. I don't want to do this now. I don't want to give all this up. And to his credit, because he'd been living in America, he just sort of looked at me for a minute, and then he sort of laughed. He said, well, of course. And then he went back and he supported her in her desire not to get married. And it's partly that we're really in a different reality now. And many people are holding on and trying to impose this very stable societal model in which everybody behaves in a certain way, when in fact the whole thing, the rug's being pulled out of the whole thing. I mean, even just educating women, which I'm all for, to the extent that we're educating them and then expecting them to become subservient to mothers-in-laws or to husbands or to brother-in-laws who may not have nearly the awareness that they have at this point. It's not realistic, nor is it necessarily good for the soul. Now, having said all that, I have to concede that this is not a world I live in. And I'm not really sure what's true here, but divine law doesn't change. And so it's a very serious question of what is really being asked of me, what's going to lead me to freedom. And then you have to figure out how to get there. In a book that I just published, which is really, some of what's in that book has already appeared on the blog or in other form. But a woman asked me, she was an Indian woman, the marriage that my parents have arranged for me does not attract me. She wrote, but I have to go along with it. I wrote back and I said, no, you don't. You know, if you're old enough to get married, you probably are old enough to have a job, a passport, and you can walk out of the room. I mean, nobody's got you chained. What you're saying is it would be highly inconvenient for you not to do this because it would create chaos in the world that you're living in. But you see, those are very different points. And they really need to be understood because in the end, we're alone before God. I say that having confirmed with Daya that Swami answered the question that way. There was an Indian man that Swamiji was urging a certain action upon. He wanted him to follow a certain course. Swamiji encouraged him to follow a certain course. The man answered, but my mother would be so disappointed. Swami answered, sooner or later you're going to have to disappoint your mother. And he knew the mother. The mother was a dear friend of his also. Sooner or later you're going to have to disappoint your mother because your mother is not your guru and your mother is not necessarily asking you what God is asking of you. He had me change that when I actually published it to say, you have to be prepared to disappoint your mother. But what he actually said is, sooner or later you have to disappoint her. And he used it as an example of his own life. But no American family is as intense, I think, as Indian families. I think that's a very hard teaching.
Sorry, if you disappoint somebody, doesn't it create bad karma on their part?
If you disappoint them with pleasure in having disappointed them, with glee in having not had to do it, that's a little bit of an aberration. If they are disappointed because their ego is holding a certain point of view and you have failed to conform to their ego, that's really their problem, that's not your problem. And that's where the line comes. You know, unfortunately, most people want you to behave according to their ideas. And very few people are generous enough to actually pray to your superconscious and ask where your destiny is taking you. And when you're with people, however well-meaning, if they're not also wise, you can be very kind, but you can also be very firm. You know, I appreciate it, I understand what you're trying to do, I know that you love me, and then you say something like, but I'm sorry, I can't go along with it. And if you really feel that, you just stop there. You don't argue, you don't justify, you don't go into the story. You just stop. I'm sorry, I would do this for you if I could, but I can't. I had to face that sometime with my parents. I'd had nothing that compared to this. But I learned to say that to my parents. I would do that for you if I can, but I'm very sorry I can't. And close your mouth at that point, because there's not much else you can say that's going to be helpful. But if your heart is kind, I'm so sorry that this is hurtful to you. I'm so sorry you're disappointed in me. But I just can't. And then you pray desperately to God. Swamiji has said to us many times, other people's egos will be disappointed if you choose if you make a spiritual choice that they don't want you to make. Their egos will be disappointed, but their souls will rejoice because your spiritual advancement blesses them. And on another level, they know that. So you see, you don't even serve them in the highest sense by sacrificing your spiritual well-being, or even your artistic well-being, or your career well-being. I mean, if there are things that you have to do, you have to do. If you're expanding your consciousness and they don't want you to, just because tradition says that they have a right to doesn't mean they really do. That is tough. And I think if you're caught in that, that's your karma. Not to just endure. There's no value in just suffering. Suffering per se does not help you. Difficult situations that you willingly embrace and strive your best to meet, that will help you. But just suffering and suffering and suffering because I don't have a choice, it doesn't help you. It just drains your energy. You have to find a way to take it as your own. And you know, sometimes we don't have a choice. We have children. You know, they belong to the whole family. Their welfare is. I mean, many incarnations we don't get what we want. And then we have to go, as I was saying, inside and find the superconscious reason why this is okay. And then we know what we're doing. They may think that we're doing this for this reason, but we're doing it for a different reason. This is the right karma for me now. Does that make sense? It's a tough one. Yeah. And it always seems to happen with families, doesn't it? You just they get your heart, and there you are.
People often say that, you said, suffering does not help. People often say that, oh, this is my karma, I must have done something wrong in my previous birth, so I might as well suffer now. Or cleansing. You were telling me about this woman who was doing penance, right? Because the children were born in a certain way.
Yeah. Yes, there was this lady I knew. One of her daughters probably had leukoderma, and the son was mentally challenged. So she was a Jain. She's Jain, and she has gotten into this practice of penance. That is, one day she eats, the other day she just survives on warm water. She must be in her early 40s or 30s, and she's been doing this ever since the kids were born. Because she thought somehow she needed to clean, meaning she needed to do some sort of penance for all the wrongdoings, which is why her children were born in a certain way. So she was almost torturing herself. That's how I saw it.
Okay. Sacrifice and discipline can be very beneficial. But it has to be consciously embraced, and the more joyfully it can be embraced, the more beneficial it will be for you. To be miserable is not the same as being spiritual. And to be miserable, even in the name of, oh, if I'm miserable enough, then all these bad things will stop. The magnetism you're creating is just more misery. It's not freedom, it's just misery. So if, however, you can feel that this sacrifice is very appropriate, because maybe you sense in a past life, I got away with something. I mean, let's think for a minute. Maybe maybe you were a philandering husband whose wife, spent the incarnation weeping because you were never home with her. And the next time you get to be the wife who's left at home. I mean, it's not very complicated. If you inflict a certain suffering on someone, it's no surprise that you will suffer the same way. But there has to be a corresponding rising to meet that genuinely, where you genuinely feel, I know what I'm doing. This may take sacrifice, it may take discipline, but I'm not really suffering. I'm just doing what I know I need to do. And if you can't accept it with joy, it's often better to change your circumstances, because you just create more bad karma, more difficult karma, if all you can do is just sit around and suffer. And then say, oh, I'm suffering because. Now, the case of this woman is exceedingly complicated. And you're starting from the thought that somehow it's a curse to have children with those difficulties, which is a premise in itself that is, who's to say? Maybe this is a debt you owe to this, let's say, the boy who's not mentally normal, and you get to help him through this difficult karma. Is that a curse? Are you being punished? Are you getting a chance to really do something wonderful? People have the difficult karma to be limited, but they have the good karma to come to you. And again, depending on how you turn it. But bliss is the goal here. And we don't get to bliss by being miserable. So you should take on as much as you can take on with joy, but at the point at which you really realize that you're losing ground, then you have to think about changing your circumstances, even if you're running away. Yogananda said, if you know that a test is more than you can handle, and you know it's going to defeat you, he actually said you should run away. Because to just allow yourself to be defeated over and over again just sets the vritti going that I can't cope. And sometimes it's better just to admit defeat and go and try to get victory on something that you can. And defeat is when you can no longer generate joy within you. Now, joy is not the same as happiness. A circumstance can be very sad, and it can be sad through your whole life. But your joy is that I'm facing this bravely. I'm accepting this without complaint. I recognize this. See, just because it's your karma doesn't dictate that you must endure it. Sometimes your karma is to have the courage and the creativity to change it. So, yes, of course, everything is your karma, but your response has to be appropriate in terms of freedom. And if you've spent incarnations letting other people run your life and you've just suffered in the midst of it, to just do that one more time is not necessarily forward progress for you. So again, you see, these become very sensitive, and often you need a good friend or a spiritually wise person to watch it and help you, because you can't always tell yourself. Because if we have a bad habit, we tend to think doing more of it's going to make it better. It's just we go with our comfort. You know, I myself, I have a certain amount of endurance, but I have more creativity. So I tend to see all my karma as an opportunity to make something new. I have a friend who has less creativity and a great deal of endurance, and she tends to see all her karma as something she just has to live through. I'm always coming in with a solution. Just people are different, whatever it might be.
You also spoke of destiny, and you were explaining the tree and the
Yeah.
trees. So, is destiny something that we can create, or is it something you're just born with and you have to live with it?
I always get asked that question. I always hope that I won't get asked that question. I heard Swamiji answer it in a very interesting way recently. He said, everything is interconnected. If you think about it, I mean, think of how many things had to all come together for us just to be sitting around this table. I had to meet Swami Kriyananda in 1969 in Palo Alto, California, or I wouldn't be sitting here. And then, countless things that interwove had to all happen to bring us to this point. So if we try to look at a universe that is so interwoven and imagine that I can pull my life out of that and that I actually am completely on my own about what I do, it doesn't make any sense at all. We are part of a greater whole. Our individuality is an impression, but not a deep reality. Okay? So our destiny is interwoven with everything that we've put forward, all the lifetimes that we've had to this moment to bring us right to this moment. The way Swamiji put it is we have free will in how we respond. In other words, how we experience the life we're living is where we have our free will. Whether I'm going to suffer or find joy in it, whether I'm going to feel like a victim or like a cause. And that's where we need to focus our attention in terms of our freedom. Now, if we exercise that freedom, we start creating new magnetism and we start creating new impressions in our chakras, all of which leads to a different reality. But the apparent cause and effect shows us, that it's all interwoven. The question is kind of like also like, what would I do with that answer? I can tell that what I do today affects tomorrow, and whether or not it was predetermined what I do today, nonetheless, what I do today affects tomorrow. And so I'm going to just keep trying to do the right thing because I can't get my mind around the bigger picture. I can't figure out how to cut myself out of the fabric of the universe and give myself free will. So in that sense, Swamiji says, yeah, it's all predetermined. The book of Brigu tells people's lives thousands of years in the future. But after that, I'm sort of at a loss a little bit as to what the answer is. I become practical. I assert American practicality. What difference would it make? That's what I ask. Swamiji's answer has also been that. What difference would it make? Your problem is still the same. You're suffering, and you can alleviate your suffering and increase your happiness. The bigger picture is not really the cause of your immediate suffering. The cause of your immediate suffering is what you're doing in the moment. So if you shift that, then you shift the problem that you have. And then ultimately, you become wise enough to know. It's hard to know. Yogananda had a samadhi in August of 1948. That was just the timing. And he said Divine Mother took him around the universe. And it was a peculiar samadhi because he spoke her voice. And he had like a conversation with her. And he said things like, "Oh, so that's how you do it." I mean, it's just so preposterous. I don't even know how to think about it. But there were mysteries that he didn't understand, at least in the Leela. And so I sort of think that there's just mysteries we can't understand. But if we solve the problems that we can understand, then that will lead us to that state of consciousness. I know all my Indian audiences love really theoretical questions.
No, because I'll tell you why.
No, that one does not. I mean, everyone asks that one.
Exactly, because in India, you have this whole concept of this karma and
Yeah.
destiny, it's sort of rooted.
It's very rooted.
So you start any conversation that you have about spirituality, you start from this karma and destiny.
Right.
But also, I mean, all the epics, epics form the foundation
Right.
of basically Indian spirituality.
Uh-huh.
Essentially, that, Vedas and then the Upanishads, but Vedas and Upanishads are too complicated for
Right.
people like us to understand. So epics are sort of,
Right.
at least I can grab them easily. At least so do I think. But the entire Mahabharata is
Mhm.
also like that.
Mhm.
Constantly talking about karma and karmic connections.
Right.
So this whole thing about what is destiny?
Right.
How does it affect our lives,
Right.
our current situation, and how much of a role does our past lives play into
Well,
it?
you know,
And also, sorry,
yeah, no, go ahead.
the reincarnation bit, and like coming to terms with all these vrittis that we
Right.
have been carrying from our past
Right.
lives. So does all of that create our destiny?
Swamiji often referred to the whole tree of Hinduism particularly, but Sanatana Dharma in India, as being vastly overgrown and in need of pruning. And the avatar comes to renew the tradition. Yogananda, when he was asked if this was a new religion that he brought, no, he said it's a new expression. And so what I found with, of course, not being born into this tradition, the only understanding I have is the one I've gotten from Swami Kriyananda, which he got from Yogananda. And it just re-articulates it. And it re-articulates it exactly as I was putting it on the board. Here are your chakras. Here is the spectrum. You are making decisions. You are building up that energy. Yes, there is a momentum that dictates your tomorrow and that brought you to this point that will take you through your next incarnations. But it's not mysterious. And it's not something that's just like sort of vaguely out there that just completely drains all our energy and will from us. That's where American practicality has to meet Eastern spirituality. And I think that particular thought, oh, it's just my karma, is one of the reasons that Yogananda incarnated and Swami Kriyananda moved to India. Because it is one of those really, I'll just say it frankly, bad misunderstandings that has grown, because you can tell by the fruit of that. When Jesus was asked, how can you tell a true prophet, a true teaching from a false one, you can tell by the fruits. That, oh, it's just my karma, it's just my destiny, it's just my reincarnation. Like, how does that help anybody? It's not that it's false, it's just, with all due respect, useless. And American practicality now needs to come to the West and say, okay, these are true principles, they're powerful teachings, but they're liberating. They're not debilitating. But we have to have the courage to just push that tradition aside and think about it with the new mind that all of us have, you know, in your positions and the way you are. And if it's not helpful, then we put it aside. We don't have to say it's false. We just say it's not helpful to us to think like that. And that's really way up there. That's the one that gets everybody off the hook. Nothing is required now because I can just say, oh, it's just my karma. Nobody has to really think or put out willpower or face their own realities or take responsibility.
It's actually a lot easier to say, oh, it's just my karma.
Yes, it is definitely. And I can just say, oh, it's just my karma too, because it is a fact. But what you do after that, oh, this is my karma. That means I have to get engaged here because this is really my karma. That's a completely different way of looking at it. How to love what you have to do anyway. What is the fruit of the point of view? And that's how you can tell the truth from the false. The fruit of that one is deadly for the entire country and for every individual who embraces it. And well, it's not holding now. People are making their destiny in this country and transforming the country. Oh my goodness, it's a new reality.